Somewhere in Hastinapura, on the day her marriage to Dhritarashtra is solemnized, Gandhari, daughter of King Subala of Gandhara, a young woman who has worshipped Shiva with such unwavering devotion that the god himself promised her 100 sons, takes a length of silk and wraps it around her own eyes. The Adi Parva, chapter 110, records the act without interior monologue, without stated motive, without a single word from Gandhari herself. The text simply shows us the gesture, a woman who could see, choosing darkness. She will wear that cloth until the forest fire takes her at the end of her life. 40 years and 100 dead sons later, still blindfolded, still the wife of a blind king, her sight intact behind the silk, and entirely unused. The act has been read for centuries as the supreme expression of Pativrata Dharma, the path of the devoted wife, treated in the Dharma Shastra literature as a discipline as rigorous as any ascetic vow. Scholar R.T. Dand has noted that the Mahabharata frames Pativrata not as passive sentiment, but as tapas, austerity, a form of accumulated inner power. And the epic does bear this out. Gandhari's self-imposed blindness, sustained over decades, generates what the text calls a kind of extraordinary force. It is what allows her, when Duryodhana comes to receive her blessing before the war, to briefly remove the bandage and let her gaze fall on his body, turning his skin hard as diamond wherever her eyes rest. Her sight, hoarded in darkness, becomes power. But the Mahabharata is never simple in its moral geometry, and the text quietly holds a second reading alongside the first. Another theory recorded in the secondary tradition suggests that Gandhari was enraged, that Bhishma, patriarch of the Kuru house, had arranged her marriage to a blind king without her consent, treating her as a vessel for a dynastic alliance, and that the blindfold was not devotion but fury made permanent, a silent argument. If a blind man is considered fit for Gandhari, then a blindfolded woman is fit for Dhritarashtra. The primary Sanskrit of chapter 110 does not adjudicate between these readings. It gives us the cloth and the darkness, and leaves the motivation to reverberate. What the text does make explicit, in a remark that belongs to the psychological core of the entire epic, is the cost. The commentary tradition and the narrative itself observe, had Gandhari not been blindfolded, she could have been the sight of her husband. She could have played a decisive role in the matters of statecraft in Hastinapura. Instead, the household at the center of the Kuru Empire is governed by a man whose physical blindness is matched by his putra sneha, his devouring love for his sons, and a woman whose physical sight is fully functional, wrapped in cloth, deliberately withheld. The Sanskrit word putra sneha is precise. Sneha means both love and oil, the thing that feeds a flame. Dhritarashtra's love for Duryodhana is of this consuming, lubricating kind, and Gandhari's cloth does not stop it. This is the structural tragedy the text is building toward. Gandhari is identified at the mythological level as Mati, intellect, the goddess of intelligence, born into human form. The epic is telling us with great deliberateness, the house of the Kauravas contains intelligence, and intelligence has blindfolded itself. The consequences begin almost immediately. When Gandhari's pregnancy lasts 2 years without delivery and she learns that Kumti, wife of Pandu, has already given birth to Yudhishthira, she is overwhelmed by frustration and strikes her own womb. What emerges is not a child, but a hard mass of flesh, an iron ball. Vyasa intervenes, divides the mass into 100 pieces and one more at Gandhari's request, and seals them into jars of ghee. The Kauravas are born this way, not from ordinary gestation, but from rage and intervention and the careful management of a crisis. When Duryodhana is born, evil omens arise. The horses weep, jackals howl. Wise men, Satyavati, Vyasa, Bhishma, Vidura, advise Dhritarashtra and Gandhari to release the child onto the waters of the Ganga or kill him. Both parents refuse. The text records this refusal without softening it. Here is where the inner architecture of the denial becomes visible. Gandhari knows. Her moral intelligence is not in question. The epic repeatedly shows her as pious, just, clear-eyed in her assessments of right action. But the blindfold has become something larger than a piece of cloth. It is the shape of a vow she cannot unmake without remaking her entire identity. She has organized her life around a gesture that said, "I will not see what discomforts me." And so when the omens come, when the wise men speak, she refuses to see that either. Consider what this looks like from the inside of an ordinary life. A mother whose teenage son has begun lying regularly, not small lies, but the kind that reshape reality. She has known something was wrong for 2 years. She has told herself he is under stress, that boys pull away, that the other parents are too harsh. The knowing and the not knowing occupy the same mind at the same time. She is not stupid. She is, in fact, deeply perceptive, and it is precisely her perception that she has learned to bandage. The recognition arrives only when the school calls, when the crisis has its own momentum, when the choice is no longer hers to make quietly. In the Sabha Parva, during the dice game that will humiliate Draupadi and set the final catastrophe in motion, Gandhari is not present in the hall. The text does not explain her absence, but it is worth sitting with. The woman who is Mati incarnate, who will later rebuke Dhritarashtra for allowing it, who will chide Dushasana for his treatment of Draupadi, she is not there when the game is played. She speaks afterward. She reprimands. She says to Dhritarashtra that this act will rekindle a dead fire, topple a bridge rebuilt, destroy the dynasty. She is precisely right, and Dhritarashtra, blinded by his love for his sons, does not heed her. Moral authority without operative power. This is the particular trap the blindfold has created. Gandhari can see clearly, she can speak truly, but she has relinquished the position from which that sight might have functioned as governance. She is the conscience of the household, consulted after the damage, never during it. In the Udyoga Parva, Book 5, after Krishna's own peace mission fails, Dhritarashtra brings Gandhari into the court specifically to reach Duryodhana. It is a remarkable moment. The king who has ignored her wisdom for decades now summons her as a last resort, hoping love will succeed where reason has failed. She does try honestly. She pleads with Duryodhana to eschew the needless war. Duryodhana, raging with anger, storms out of the court. The text records no argument between them, no dialogue, only his departure. He has never learned to receive her. She has never had enough sustained presence in his upbringing to have built that channel. On the eve of the war, he comes to her for her blessing. And here, in a gesture of compressed, devastating precision, she says, "Yato dharmas tato jaya." Where there is dharma, there is victory. Sri Parva 11.17. She refuses to bless him outright. She conditions the blessing on righteousness, knowing implicitly that his cause is not righteous, knowing he will hear it as a blessing anyway. It is the last true thing she will be able to say to him, dressed as a gift. The Sri Parva, Book 11, is one of the shortest subparvas in the entire epic, 168 verses. It moves with the terrible efficiency of grief that has nowhere else to go. Gandhari walks onto the battlefield of Kurukshetra. She is still blindfolded. But the accumulated tapas of her decades-long vow has given her divya drishti, inner sight, divine vision. At Sri Parva 11.16 verse 59, she cries out, "Ya pashyami hatan putran, pautran, bratrans, Keshava." O Keshava, I see with this inner sight the slain sons, grandsons, and brothers. She has voluntarily forfeited her physical eyes, and so she uses the other kind, the vision that suffering has opened. It is among the most painful ironies in the entire epic. The woman who covered her eyes so she would not have to see her husband's blindness now sees, in brilliant and terrible detail, the battlefield her household has made. She confronts Krishna. The curse she delivers, as recorded in Sri Parva chapter 25, draws explicitly on the merit she has accumulated through her devotion. By the little merit I have acquired through waiting dutifully on my husband, by that merit so difficult to attain, I shall curse thee. Since thou wert indifferent to the Kurus and the Pandavas whilst they slew each other, thou shalt be the slayer of thy own kinsmen. In the 36th year from this, after causing the slaughter of thy kinsmen and friends and sons, thou shalt perish. Krishna accepts the curse. He tells her, There is none in the world save myself capable of exterminating the Vrishnis. In uttering this curse, thou hast aided me in the accomplishment of that task. He receives her grief as collaboration. Her moral authority, so long unused as governance, becomes in its final expression prophecy. After the war, during the forest years described in the Ashramavasaka Parva, Vyasa offers her one extraordinary gift: to see her dead sons and grandsons, just for a night. He is moved by her sorrow that she never once set sight on the faces of her sons. That phrase arrests everything. She never set sight on their faces. She chose darkness before they were born, before their names were spoken, and she wore it through every stage of their lives and deaths. 15.37 records her in this period. Queen Gandhari, with bandaged eyes, joining her hands, addressed her father-in-law. The bandage is still there. She dies in the forest fire still wearing it. What to carry forward into your actual day? The blindfold in this story is not foolishness. Gandhari is, by every account the epic gives us, an intelligent and morally serious person. The text is showing us something more uncomfortable than stupidity. It is showing us how a person can construct a whole life around a single act of self-limitation, motivated perhaps by love, perhaps by anger, and watch that limitation grow until it shapes everything: the children, the household, the dynasty, the war. The Mahabharata does not offer Gandhari as a villain or a fool. It offers her as a warning about the particular cost of a chosen not seeing. The way we sometimes bandage our own clearest vision in the name of devotion, and discover standing on the battlefield that inner sight was never extinguished, only deferred. The cloth was always removable. That is perhaps the hardest thing.